Welcome to this second in a series of Advent talks. You've already heard a presentation by Father Bernard Fox, and in due course you will hear a presentation by Sister Isabel Smythe for her work in interreligious dialogue reflecting on Jesus the Jew. I'm going to focus on Advent and the Incarnation. We are literally on the threshold of the season of Advent, and it's often a time now that seems to pass by. Rather interestingly, this afternoon in the car I was listening to Band Aid, Do They Know It's Christmas, of some 37 years ago. I'm tempted to say, do they know it's Advent, as we stand on the threshold of a new liturgical season. Advent and Incarnation. We reflect on the birth of Jesus in the stable at Bethlehem. The stable, the peripheries. Sometimes we wrap the stable up in cotton wool. But in fact, if we are really true to ourselves, the stable could have been in the middle of nowhere or at the back of beyond. And there, God reveals himself to the world in a stable for humanity to come and adore him. Sometimes we condition ourselves to think that Jesus might have been born in some chic five-star hotel, so to speak, in downtown Bethlehem. But in fact, it is the reality of the stable, of humanity and Mother Nature. And one way in which we often hear about the story of the Incarnation is not about the event of the stable itself, but is at the beginning of St. John's Gospel, the prologue, which we often miss because it's read on Christmas morning for Mass during the day, and on the 31st of January towards the end of the Christmas octave. So as our backdrop and for our time of reflection, and maybe which you can come back to, is to reflect on John 1, first chapter of St. John 1 to 18. And this is St. John's Gospel. In the beginning was the Word. The Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him all things came to be. Not one thing had its being, but through him. All that came to be had life in him, and that life was the light of men, a light that shines in the dark, a light that darkness could not overpower. A man came sent by God. His name was John. He came as a witness to speak for the light, so that everyone might believe through him. He was not the light, only a witness to speak for the light. The Word was the true light that enlightens all men, and he was coming into the world. He was in the world that had its being through him, and the world did not know him. He came to his own domain, and his people did not accept him. But to all who did accept him, he gave power to become children of God, and to all who believe in the name of him, who is born not of human stock or urge of the flesh, or of will of man, but of God himself. The Word was made flesh. He lived among us, and we saw his glory. The glory that is his as the only Son of the Father, full of grace and truth. John appeared as a witness. He proclaims, "This is the one of whom I said, he who comes after me ranks before me, because he existed before me." Indeed, from his fullness we have all received, yes, grace in return from grace. Since though the law was given through Moses, grace and truth have come through Jesus Christ. No one has ever seen God. It is the only Son who is nearest to the Father's heart, who has made him known. We're now just short of 2 years of having lived through the pandemic. And the pandemic has confronted all of us with a lot of mess. And the reality is that God is born in a stable. God is born in mess. And in that mess, humanity comes to adore him. The shepherds bring their lambs. The kings will bring their gifts. They will come to adore the infant king. They will come to the stable, on the peripheries, out of the city. And it is in that way that we now start to look at Advent. Advent can often pass us by because we hear of different things in the world. This year, as the world sort of emerges from the pandemic, and just now there are some worrying setbacks, Advent now is the time for a light to shine. The light of the stable, but the light of our faith. And that faith is not born from something that we learn from a book. It is something that relates us, because our faith helps us to belong. And the Incarnation, God revealed in the stable at Bethlehem, brings us together. It allows us to relate to each other and to connect. Sure, we might not have all the right words to express the Incarnation, but we do have the words that try and bring us together. We have learnt the words of the pandemic, and now we have an Advent that's being celebrated in the pandemic. Last year, our Advent was very restricted. We didn't see much light at the end of the tunnel as restrictions throughout the world, and particularly in Europe, gradually were reimposed. Our Christmas celebration was to be one day before lockdown effectively kicked in. The idea of the Incarnation bringing us together seemed to be conditioned by a certain time and space in a way that we could never have seen. The world just now looks for a purpose. God reveals himself to us in a stable, not in some perfect beauty spot, but in a stable that allows humanity to come together, to heal and bandage its wounds, to heal those times of hurt, of disconnectedness, of pain and sorrow, but also of the struggles of faith, of the doubts. Bring all that together this Advent and start this weekend with Advent in your struggles and in your doubts, your struggles of faith and your doubts, your struggles with the world, the pandemic, vaccinations, the suffering. We have all been moved by the scenes from the English Channel earlier this week. Bodies have to be identified. Some of them are children. The reality of the Incarnation, of God becoming a child in the stable, is perhaps borne out no more so bluntly and brutally on the beach that finds the bodies that have been washed up as a result of this disaster. There is very little light as they made the crossing in darkness. Advent starts in light, with a light that grows stronger, because we light our Advent candle, and we continue to light our Advent candles as we go to come together. This Advent, remember Advent. Don't forget it. It is very easy to do. Remember to write the Christmas cards. It's important for people to get the Christmas card through the letterbox. Sure, it's easy to send a text message or a group WhatsApp, write the Christmas card. It's just a little more personal. It allows people to belong. It allows them to relate. The world just now is crying out for help. It's crying out for God's help. History has shown us that we have seen many things. Wars, natural disasters, systems that have brought peoples to their knees. But nothing such as a pandemic that we cannot control. We might feel it is out of control. We find it's out of our comfort zone. Well, remember, Jesus, the child, was not born in the comfort zone. He was born in anything but the comfort zone. He was born in a stable. And maybe the wind was howling, the rain was battering off what was left of this stable. And Joseph and Mary are there with their child, with the animals, and Mother Nature is there. God's creation is the place where the child Jesus is born. Not in the ideal spot, but let's face it just now, very little is ideal. History has taught us that we can learn much from brokenness and humanity's imperfect picture. So this Advent, if you have the time, read the first chapter of St. John's Gospel at your leisure, even taking a few words a day, and move with it through this season of Advent. You will hear Christmas songs on radios, televisions, and everywhere else. You will see Christmas trees already in houses. You will see them in shops and in public places. But don't forget Advent. Don't forget the time and the space. And maybe as we do, I would like to conclude with a few words from Pedro Arrupe, relative to his time as when he was in Hiroshima, when he was there when the atomic bomb went off. 25 years later, Pedro Arrupe returned as the Father General of the Society of Jesus. And this was part of his speech, a prophetic speech, I suspect, and a prophetic voice, but a voice that speaks of an Advent time for this broken world of ours that comes to the peripheries to adore the child Jesus in the stable at Bethlehem. And these are the words of Pedro Arrupe. How much time teaches us. History is the teacher of life, but only in condition that we know how to read her lessons. The oven of Hiroshima has become a fixed satellite in the stratosphere, accompanying the Earth in its course round the sun. It is like a latter-day sword of Damocles hanging over humanity. Its sinister light, capable of destroying the retina of anyone staring at it in the face, is an illuminating and discriminating power greater than that of any X-ray. In the midst of so much destruction, confusion and corruption, the dark mystery of atomic radiation renders the screen of humanity, revealing both the fleshy futility of that which disappears like a shadow, and the solidity firmer than a bone of spiritual values. A frontier situation that transposes values. Atomic energy in destroying matter discloses its instability, while making the spirit stand out with its features more strongly pronounced. Now yet another explosion is breeding in the womb of time as millions die from hunger and subhuman existence. More than half the human family is undernourished. Day by day, the condition of the marginal sections of the people of the underdeveloped nations grow more unbearable. And who is responsible for this state of affairs? I do not think that a sin of this kind can be attributed to a few persons only. Rather, a sizable part of the human family is at fault. Maybe this Advent we will reflect on the faults that we've all seen, and that humanity can carry those faults to the stable at Bethlehem. And so, like the Magi, we can come and do him homage. So this Advent, reflect on the child Jesus. God becomes man in the broken stable of Bethlehem. And bring your brokenness to that stable, your brokenness of life and of faith. And like the child Jesus, heal them, restore them, renew them, and reconcile them to you, so that on the day of Nativity, you too might have the courage to say that I come to adore him.